Last year I spoke at a conference, and afterwards the organizer came to me and said they wanted someone controversial, but she never expected anyone to be as controversial as me. It was an interior design seminar, and other speakers were praising the wonderful world of Ralph Lauren. I chose to speak on why Monte Cassino makes me want to cut my own eyes out. I don't think it was particularly controversial. That said, I do have a disclaimer. And I'd like to say, my name is McKechnie, as Hugh introduced me. I'm currently studying at Wits Business School. I consult to Activate Architects, so the views that I'm expressing today are completely my own views. They have nothing to do with the practice. They're not necessarily right, and you're welcome to debate any issues that I raise. I'm also a counsellor on the Department of Sport, Arts and Recreation and Culture for City of Johannesburg. So if you have massive offense to anything that I say, you're welcome to direct your anger in writing to the MEC, and I'm sure he will respond. I'm known for being a proponent of downtown Johannesburg, and certainly Johannesburg Central is far more sustainable, more authentic, offers more opportunity and greater diversity, and is a better place to see a return on your property investments than a small, decentralized, micro-office node like Sandton. But I'm not going to discuss these statements here today. Rather, I'd like to talk about cities, about Johannesburg, New York, London, about architecture, aesthetic, connectivity, experience, delight, where we as South African architects are excelling and where we've lost the plot completely. So what is it that makes a city? Are cities simply about built density? And certainly a node like Sandton seems to be attaining a city-like density. But is density the only thing that we're considering here? Is that all that it takes to make a city? And I found this interesting quote. It says, architecture in Johannesburg has reached a most anomalous stage. Enormous building activity has inevitably led to an almost total neglect of critical standards. Buildings are frequently described in the press, to which no architect's name can be attributed, and certainly to which no respecting architect would put his name. This comes from the South African Architectural Record in July 1937. So what are we doing wrong that 70 years later we're sitting pretty much in the same position? What is it that we haven't learned? I found this quite an interesting building. So is this the way to create a city? I could talk about how over 70 mature trees, with a history dating back almost 100 years to the Rosebank Junior School, were felled for this office block. But more interesting to me now is the way that this building addresses the urban environments, or in fact the way that it doesn't address the urban environments. Johannesburg is a popular, or Rosebank, sorry, is a popular business node, famous as a walkable district. Human-scale buildings, highly permeable to the street and public space, create a welcoming and pleasant pedestrian experience. Does this building take any cognizance of this environment? A monolithic glass box, cut off from the street by on-grade parking with leftover unusable space as an urban green pocket? Perhaps they needed a better landscape architect to push them a little bit further. I think part of the problem is our profession's current obsession with green building. And please don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with any endeavor to conserve our planet's finite resources or to try to create more sustainable buildings and communities. But many architects have become completely obsessed with checking the green boxes. In fact, so much so that we've lost sight of the spirit of architecture. The green obsession is reducing architecture from the spiritual of an art form to the dull science of an accounting audit, box checking, number crunching, paper pushing. The appeal, I think, is that green is easy to tabulate, to sell commercially, while good design is about space, experience, aesthetic, spirit. It's difficult to quantify or put a commercial value on these aspects which are present in exemplary architecture. So there was an interesting City Chat column which Neil Fraser writes, and I enjoyed one of his recent ones, where he talks about a lack of sense of place in architecture. And he says, as I ascend 15 floors from car park to plush offices in yet another aluminium box, I think of all the other aluminium boxes which we now use for departure and arrival. The global bland, I think, eliminates our sense of place. Arrivals, whether by plane, train, or lift, should create a sense of expectancy, a prologue to the story that will unfold. Departures are the epilogue, a last glance, an invitation to return. And this is certainly as valid for the once-in-a-lifetime trip as it is for the daily commute. This is a space which I absolutely love, a transport interchange. It's Norman Foster's Canary Wharf in London. And I mean, when you come up those escalators, you're just waiting for the city to explode. It is a phenomenal, phenomenal urban experience. Moving on, the architects of New York's Grand Central Station also captured the excitement and larger-than-life qualities of the city. The original Gordon Leith Park Station in Johannesburg had pioneer paintings of scenes from around South Africa decorating the main concourse and giving the place a sense of centrality. All roads lead to and from the city of gold. But today, a sense of wonder is a luxury, or certainly in Johannesburg, I feel that that's the case, as our places of transition have become cages for captive consumers filled with persuasions to buy. Economic necessities do inhibit individualistic structures, but in our race to the bottom line, we leave in our wake a numbness of being anywhere and nowhere simultaneously. And I think, unfortunately, the Gautrain is a case in point here. Bland generic stations, unidentifiable one from the other, I think this is a huge missed opportunity. Instead of creating gateways to new travel experiences where one emerges from the ground to reveal unexplored and exciting new urban possibilities, we have to make do with awkward stations, sandwiched between under-designed buildings and overly busy, pedestrian impossible streets. There's really no connectivity to any type of urban experience here. The human element is completely absent from these stations. No newspaper kiosks, no coffee stands, hawkers are forbidden. Your Gautrain Gold Card opens the turnstile into an inhospitable, bland, and over-regulated unreality. Park Station is probably the best terminal that we have, and I think it gets as close to an urban experience as anything on Gautrain does. There is some sense of public urban space on arrival. The location, however, is a little bit less fortunate. It's not in Braamfontein, it's not downtown. For me, it feels like an awkward stepchild left to fend for itself in no man's land. So what is it that's creating this global bland? I think it's not only a function or a symptom of function over aesthetic, but also of the removal of human interaction and thought from the design process. The time taken to draft an elevation, to consider its proportion, the deliberate thought and action of erasing and redrawing a pencil line on paper, this gives a design life. The human elements of thought and spirit in design that the advent of AutoCAD began to erode a generation ago has now been completely obliterated by the global adoption of Revit, a standard, generic, robotic design tool. And we wonder why one building looks exactly like the next. One surface feels the same as another. The aspect of humanity, discovery, surprise, delight, mistake, banished from the design process. So how do we combat this generic, this global bland? I'm not in a position to answer that, but certainly it's a critical challenge facing architects today, and I think it's one that's worth some thought. The Preamble to the National Development Plan, adopted by government to chart South Africa's way forward to 2030, states, "As South Africans, we know our history and that of other people. We have learned a great deal from our complex past, and this adds continually to our experience of being African." So what can we learn from architectural history in Johannesburg? Modern movement buildings make for particularly interesting case studies, and especially considering the current trend towards mass machine production. There's also a growing appreciation for modern movement architecture from within the profession and from the general public as well. And since I am a councillor on Provincial Heritage Resources Agency, I had to slip in an old building. So I'd like to look at Hot Point House. It's a building that was designed by Hanson, Tompkinson, and Finkelstein in 1936. And this is a building that was very exciting for me because in its time, it backed the trend for crass, commercially driven shit architecture. It stretched the boundaries of planning, construction, and design. And I'm going to rate this building pretty much on aesthetic and its relationship to the urban environment, which is not really doing it justice because I think that this is probably one of South Africa's architectural masterpieces. But for today, I think this is good enough. So the entire street front of the building is cantilevered, which allows uninterrupted glazing along the pavements. Yeah. Hold on one second, I've totally lost my place. And this creates a visually permeable edge between Hotpoint and the city. The facade is a case study in composition, and architects in the 30s still had classical training in Palladian proportioning, the golden section, Renaissance architecture. So the fact that the building is perfectly proportioned is no mistake. There's an underlying understanding here of architectural composition. It's not aesthetic for aesthetic's sake, which I think is it's a trap that we fall into very much today. Ribbon windows pick up the beautiful horizontal of the Bree Street Canyon, and they're offset by light and elegantly projecting balcony stacks, faced in black glass to reflect activity in the street below. Hotpoint represented a change in architectural attitude, a rejection of second best, an exploration of buildings and their relationship to the street and to the city. So you can see down here these beautiful glazed shop fronts at the bottom of the building, and here as well. And something that was really special in the 30s in Johannesburg was that people would go and have a look at these shops at night. I think the typography of Hotpoint is also extremely beautiful. It's not something that's slapped onto the building afterwards. It's completely designed and decided as part of the building. I would have loved to have a better picture of Hotpoint in its context. There's a building next door which is Pizza House, which is also a phenomenal modernist building, and the relationship between the two is really, really special. Unfortunately, this is on a part of Bree Street that's absolutely trashed. So to take a picture now to show you the urban context is almost like taking a picture of someone's corpse, and I think it's disrespectful to the buildings. So I chose to show them to you in their beautiful, pristine condition. So moving on, the 1936 review of the building goes on to praise the stripped-down aesthetic, the architect's rejection of the tendency to imagine what feature can best be elongated hideously or perched uncomfortably as a crowning feature on some unfortunate structure. So if many architects are not engaging at the forefront of creating integrated cities and reinvigorating civic urban space, who else will? There are some exemplary South Africans pushing the boundaries of city exploration and pioneering new urban public interaction. Never one to play it safe. Oh, come on, what's this thing doing now? There we go. Never one to play it safe. South African fashion designer David Tlale created a massive stir, closing Nelson Mandela Bridge for his Midnight Fashion Week show. He brought the high fashion and the Joburg A-list back to the streets of the city. And in the process, he also claimed his title as the Prince of South African Couture. The fashion show actually ran 3 hours late for anyone who was unfortunate enough to be there, but the urban experience was absolutely spectacular. Always the most coveted Fashion Week invite, this year Tlale previewed his new collection on the steps of City Hall. Once the center of Johannesburg's public life, Government Square had all but been forgotten. Tlale could have plugged into what others had already pioneered, hosting a downtown show in the relative safety of Maboneng or Braamfontein. But instead, he chose a spectacular and completely unique location. Guests were whisked from the Fashion Week tents in Newtown to the foot of the Rissik Street fountains, the glowing white Barbican, the warm sandstone of City Hall, and the ruins of the ZAR Stuyvesant Rissik Street post office created the perfect backdrop for Tlale's impeccable, vintage-inspired, quintessentially African take on contemporary couture. More important, though, the event reactivated disused civic space, bringing activity and life into the heart of the city center and bringing it there at night. I'd call David Tlale an inspirational, urban, African civic pioneer. And really, this could only be done in the city. Sandton has no civic heart, and please don't tell me here Nelson Mandela Square or Melrose Arch. This activation of civic space can only happen in an authentic downtown environment, and as architects and creative professionals, this is something that we should be pioneering. We've all heard many excuses for buildings that turn their backs on civic context, creating dislocated islands instead of pioneering connected, sustainable urban neighborhoods. As South Africans, crime is an excuse offered for all eventualities. Other popular choices with architects: the budget was too tight, the client wanted a parking lot instead of an entrance lobby, the urban environment was too rough or too difficult to deal with, or nobody walks anyway. A building that flies in the face of all these excuses is Nina Cohen and Fiona Garson's Wits Art Museum in Braamfontein. This is a building that could easily have become a bunker, and certainly every excuse tendered for the creation of an island building is applicable to the Wits Art Museum. Wits is a client obsessed with and extremely suspicious with creating any type of connection to the city. And anyone who's a pedestrian and has tried to get onto the campus from Braamfontein without the automatic credibility lent by driving a motor car will attest to this. It's impossible. The building stands at the southeast edge of the campus, which is a perfect position to act as a connector between the university and Braamfontein, and also a strategic gateway to the inner city. Originally a motor car dealership, the space had become degraded through years of neglect and disuse. Infested with taxi drivers, illegal informal traders, litter, and general urban decay, Wits erected a prefabricated wall topped with barbed wire, which further cut the building off from the city. So the design proposal was quite a drastic one, opening up the original motor court corner with sliding glazed walls and blurring the distinction between the interior and exterior of the space, and between the building and the city around it. Once a sinkhole, the Art Museum has become a beautiful icon at the edge of Braamfontein and has opened Wits up to this vibrant and regenerated district of the city. At night, the building becomes a glowing beacon and the gateway to downtown. So you can actually see here that this beautiful glass wall on the corner completely slides back and you totally open the building up to the city. So you encourage this amazing interaction between the urban environment and the building. They didn't just look at their building, or they didn't look at the building confines as ending at the edge of their page of paper where they were designing it. There's actually a really great coffee shop that's moved in here now, so the space is even more dynamic and exciting. But I thought it was quite a great picture with no one in there. Being architects, we always like pictures of buildings where there's no people. This clicker thing does not work properly. It seems like, okay, there we go. Further, the architect's sensitive reuse of the building has created a seamless integration between an old building and its new function. Original material like terrazzo, glazed external tiles, and marble were retained, cleaned, and incorporated into the new art museum, creating a beautifully crafted piece of civic architecture. I think this is the ultimate antidote to the contemporary condition of generic global bland. And in fact, they even reused the concrete on the floor and polished it. And what you can't see in the picture, because everybody keeps complaining about the resolution of the projector, is that you can actually see where the old office partitions were. So, they haven't over-cleaned the building. They haven't tried to take that history away from it. And I think that's all stuff that makes the building so much more special and authentic. They reused the original office staircases, the original marble. There's the beautiful glazed blue ceramic tiles. And if you look at the bottom part of the building, it doesn't feel like a jarring addition to an old building. It actually integrates, there's a picture there looking up onto this crazy old building with this wild revolving restaurant at the top. And the two, although it's a very contemporary intervention in an old building, the two, I think they marry really well. I hate technology. I'm just putting that out there. Okay, well, that will just have to do. I think there was another slide, but it's fine. You can just imagine it. No, it's fine. It's fine. So the last space I'd like to look at that for me is quite dynamic and exciting because it's an urban interactive space is Main Street Mall in Johannesburg. And I think this is probably the most successful street space in the city. People always go on about Melrose Arch High Street, and yes, Melrose Arch is very pretty, but to get here, you have to go through a boom gate with an access control person and spikes, and there's lots of guards, and it's really not much of an urban or a real urban experience. So it's really important to remember that people can't be forced to use streets. And I mean, if you go out onto the high street now, you'll see it's rather quiet, unless there's an event or something. I think there isn't that sort of critical urban mass that you have downtown in an area like Melrose Arch. So Main Street is a strategic artery. It links Gandhi Square Transport Terminus in the center of the city to the banks, mining houses, and courts, and the Newtown cultural area. Also important to the continued sustainability of the streets are Anglo-American, who form an anchor at the west end of Main Street, and Nedbank's 100 main office, which forms the east anchor. Diverse functions along the streets ensure pedestrian activity and movement, creating a sustainable node made safe through the use and activity, rather than through access control, booms, razor wire, and electric fencing. Streets should be social spaces, community nodes, explosions of color, energy, and daily interactions. And certainly cities are not solely created through built density, but rather through the creation of sustainable, safe public space. The great American urbanist Jane Jacobs noted, "Think of a city, and what comes to mind? Its streets. A city is not simply a collection of buildings created in a void, with streets as leftover space between. A city is a living organism, and streets, as its main public spaces, are the arteries that sustain the city's life." So, in this case, the rebirth of a city and the way to create a city has to start on the street rather than with buildings. When people say that a city is dangerous, whether the danger is perceived or real, they mean they don't feel safe on their own pavements. They don't feel safe on their own streets. So, my final thought to Hugh, he says that I'm the lone voice speaking for Johannesburg Central, and to people who still live in Fourways, who don't need to see Italy because they have Monte Cassino. Think that Sandton is a city, that the world ends just south of Hyde Park, and that there's no activity or investment in authentic urban environments. I leave you with this one last thing. I hate like these, massive build-ups at the end. I always screw it up and start crying or something, so I'm going to do my best. So to critical mass, 70 Juta, Mabaneng, Play Braamfontein, Perpetuity, Wits Art Museum, ANC Lutuli House, ABSA, South Point, the Rand Club, Standard Bank, excluding your abortion in Rosebank, Jonathan Liebman, Joy Beitendach, Anglo-American, Katlego at Kramer's Coffee, Adam Levy, Urban Ocean, Nedbank, especially your 100 main office, FNB, Gerald Garner, Gauteng Provincial Government, Neutral and Federal, the Anstey's Building, the Star Newspaper, Zurich Insurance, BHP Billiton, Chamber of Mines, David Tlale, Transnet, the South African Receiver of Revenue, the suburban kids who think that they invented cool by living in Ponty, Mercedes-Benz South Africa Fashion Week, Gauteng Institute for Architecture, but only when your roller shutters are up. You pioneer civic reactivation. You create sustainable, inclusive urban environments. You are South African. You back the trend. You don't play it safe. All roads lead to the city of gold, and you make Johannesburg great.